Freemasonry and its history have a proud footing in things like Lodge of Refreshment, Table Lodge, even our tavern beginnings. This evening, we're going to be talking about some of the proud history behind the Lodge at Refreshment. And we have an awesome guest on this evening that's going to help walk us through just some of that special history and maybe, just maybe, share a special recipe with us at the end. So I hope you stick with us this evening as we take historical light from labor to refreshment right after this.
Welcome back to the Historical Light Masonic Podcast, dedicated to illuminate our past and bring our Masonic history to light since 2016. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome back to another episode of Historical Light. I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers. So proud to be back. And for the first time this evening, we're also live on TikTok. So if you're joining us there, I appreciate you guys trying to keep it fresh and hit all those platforms for you guys. So thanks so much for joining in. We do have Yvette as well, sharing everything out for us this evening. So thank you so much for doing that and also acting as the moderator over on the TikTok side. So I've introduced myself, and now I need to introduce our special guest for this evening, Brother Cedric Jacobson. Thank you so much for joining us. My brother, if you don't mind, if you give us a more proper introduction.
Of course. I'm very glad to be here tonight with you, Brother Alex, and just excited to share some of the things that I've gotten more and more interested over the years in Masonry. I was made a Mason in 2013, was very active in my mother lodge there. A couple years later, joined the Masonic Lodge of Research in Connecticut, and then was engaged in the York Rite, sat in the East in both chapter and council, as well as the Research Lodge. And then since that time have gotten involved with the York Rite College and the Allied Masonic degrees.
That's fantastic. So you stay busy.
I try to, although shortly before the pandemic, my then girlfriend and now wife and I moved from Connecticut to Boston, and the Connecticut lodges are still like, they hold a special place in my heart, and I have kind of struggled to find a new home lodge here, especially given the pandemic interruptions.
That's a lot to go through. First of all, congratulations. I think he's
thank you.
here, right? That's huge. I mean, going through the pandemic, that big of a change, but also a marriage during the pandemic, that's a lot. That's a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but we're settled now. So I'm ready to get back out to lodges.
There you go. So we usually start things off by hitting you up with a few icebreaker questions just to get to know you a little bit. And the first one we have for you is, what brought you into Freemasonry?
Sure. So I moved to New Haven, Connecticut in 2012, I think. Not I think, it was 2012. And it was a brand new place. I didn't know anyone there. I had moved there for work. And I really grew up in a community that was pretty tight knit, and so I was seeking to kind of create that experience for myself in my new home. And I, went around and shopped for different churches and joined a church, and that kind of scratched the itch for a while. But I found myself really wanting to connect with other like-minded people, people who I could enjoy time with beyond just, a Sunday worship service or a weekday Bible study. And to anticipate your second question, I knew a little bit about Masons because my grandfather was a Mason and sat as master of his lodge in the 60s. And so I had kind of a favorable opinion of them in that regard. And it just so happened one Sunday that the local commandery was doing a special presentation at church, and I hung out afterwards and chatted with a few of the brothers there. And shortly thereafter came and visited not the lodge, but the brothers before the meeting, and shared a meal with them. And that kind of started my journey.
That's awesome, man. So, yeah, you took us right into the second question where I typically ask if you have family history in Freemasonry, which you do. So, I ponder here, how much of a role did that family history play into you really wanting to make this leap, or was it really something else?
Um, I think that part of it was some desire to connect with my grandfather.
Mm,
But also, I think, I was at that point in my life. I was in my mid to late 20s. I was starting to really think about my own development as a human.
sure.
You're done with college. You stop, reading textbooks. I wanted to do things that could push me to continue to develop, not only socially, but like interpersonally and from a maturity standpoint and all the above. And I also have kind of a deep interest in history and historical connections,
Right.
hence the topic of tonight's conversation. Um, and the lodge that I joined in Connecticut happened to be the oldest in Connecticut. It was chartered in 1750. And so there was a rich history and tradition at Hiram Lodge number 1 that I feel very fortunate to have been a part of.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, before we get into the main topic for this evening, we want to give you guys out there a chance, as we always do, to join the Historical Light team. We are viewer supported. We've been around since 2016 and hope to continue that with you guys. So, if you like what you see, like what we're doing here, you can go to our website, historicallight.com/support, and become part of the family, part of the team by supporting us through Patreon. Other quick announcement is Masonic Con Kansas is coming up quickly on the calendar, August 27th. Get those tickets while you still can. We have a few left. You can go to MasonicConKansas.com and get those tickets as well. Historical Light is hosting that. We have some really, really amazing speakers coming to Kansas City, some of them for the first time. So go check out the website, see the roster lineup, and come join us. So, brother, I am stoked about this topic this evening. When I talked to you about it originally, and you showed me some of your
Mhm.
notes, I was like, "Oh man, this is amazing." So, what brought you about really kind of the interest in the lodge at Refreshment, and
Mhm.
what got you into this research?
Sure. My first ever Masonic research paper was, as I mentioned, my lodge was chartered in 1750. We had kind of a sense of the more recent places where the lodge had met. The building that the lodge still meets in was constructed in 1926. The one before that was constructed in the 1860s. Uh, but memory got kind of fuzzy after that. And
Okay.
I was very curious about where the lodge originally met. And so I started a pretty long research project with a dear friend, and spent many long nights at the temple, digging through the archives, looking at old minutes and secretary's notes, trying to decipher dates and places. And in that research, we ended up creating a map of New Haven, or an overlay of a map of New Haven, Connecticut from 1748. And we sort of like traced the lodge's meeting places from its inception up to present
Oh,
day.
that's
Uh,
amazing.
and so in my months with nose in the record books, I ended up coming across a lot of receipts. And
Sure.
it's very strange to see old receipts, because I say receipt and I think that narrow strip of paper. It seems like the older receipts, especially receipts of organizations like a lodge, would just be on like little scraps of paper, oftentimes with a
Right.
torn edge. And it would be, to brother so and so or to this organization, and then just kind of a quick list of things and the total. And so I kept seeing these receipts over and over, and it would be like, here's a gallon of rum, here's 3 gallons of wine. Here's we need to get the aprons cleaned. I don't know if there's overlap there, but it sure seemed like there was plenty of imbibing as part of the social aspect of Masonry. And the more I saw it, the more and more I grew curious about kind of a story behind what was happening there.
That's awesome, man.
Mm.
You mentioned overlap, and funny story pops in my head because the one that I saw in ours quite a bit was cleaning of the aprons. I mean, like
Mhm.
several times a year. And when I was going through that, writing the book on my lodge, it kind of blew my mind because I'm like, when the hell's the last time we cleaned the aprons? They used to do this like monthly, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then I learned the hard way that aprons do not do well in the washing machine unless they're in a special
Mhm.
bag. And that was fun. But yeah, it's super interesting to kind of get that inside look at what they were buying and how they were transacting during those days.
Mhm. And our lodge's receipts were most occasionally like a rental fee for a room, although that was rare. The earliest dated receipt I could find was for purchase of gloves and then laundering of aprons. And then
Awesome.
those are the main like items. And then it's just food and alcohol and food and alcohol.
Happy people.
It seems like it. There's this illusion, I think, of our founding fathers as kind of teetotaling, very righteous people. Uh,
Right.
but in the 1770s, 1780s, the average per capita consumption in America was 3.7 gallons of the hard stuff, not just beer and
Right.
wine. That's the
Right.
spirits.
They knew how to party, man.
They really did.
All right, man. Well, you have me super intrigued. I'm gonna turn it over to you. I want to hear about the Lodge at Refreshment.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I have some visuals to go along with the chat today. If you're listening to the podcast form of this presentation, you'll miss a little, but I have tried to structure it in a way that it's not too much. So this is just a slide showing kind of an early tavern type picture. And there's a quote from a book that we'll reference a little bit later on that discusses the importance of punch to early America. And for the benefit of listeners, I just want to read it briefly. It says, in the age of chaos, long before the creation of the cocktail, spirituous and aqueous, thick and thin, sweet and sharp and unctuous were all tumbled together in one undifferentiated mass without form or order. Then from the east there rose a sun to dry the wet and distill the light from the heavy. And then all the drinks began to know their proper kind and submit the willfulness of their doing to the correction of just reason. That sun had a name, and that name was punch. I include this quote for a couple of reasons. I think it will be obvious to Masons, but also to indicate that prior to the movement to ban alcohol in this country, punch was kind of the go-to cocktail. It wasn't, there weren't all these fancy cocktails that you might see at a bar nowadays. It was just punch and various forms of punch. So an introduction for kind of the flow of things tonight. We already went through the introduction, but I want to highlight one other bit of information. Then we'll talk about Freemasons as well. Before that, taverns and drinking culture in colonial and early America. Then we'll talk about Freemasons as it relates to taverns and refreshment. We'll talk about a punch bowl. And then the final section of this conversation will be about how we attempted to recreate the punch based on receipts. So by way of introduction, I mentioned this a couple minutes ago. This was a good friend and brother who engaged in this research with me. Kind of in the background there, you can see the early maps of New Haven. And And this paper ultimately grew out of our interest there. I mentioned the receipts that we saw during that research earlier, but also wanted to note that there was something in one of the old books that was in the archives about this punch bowl. And here you can see a picture of it. It said it belonged to Hiram Lodge in New Haven, Connecticut. And we were very intrigued about this and asked many brothers about our lodge, and no one seemed to have much information. So this was a brand new discovery, and that's kind of what steered us toward punch. So briefly to describe the research method, obviously, primary sources are the ideal, and we used, physical objects from the archives, including receipts and photos, as well as etchings. Where those weren't.
We would use books to help us with that. So there were a couple books that were a big help. One was called Taverns in Early America, and another was called Punch. We also used some newspaper articles to fill in some gaps, as well as other papers and previous research that we've engaged with. So let's talk about taverns and drinking culture. Today's bar that you might go down the street to, it really pales in comparison to the Colonial Tavern. The tavern served a vital role in pretty much every early American society. And that's what we're going to talk about in the following slides. So included here are some visuals. This is the bar portion of a tavern, historical recreation tavern in Lexington, Mass. And when you look at early colonial America and then early in the country of America, most towns had two prominent noticeable structures. And one is the church, and then the other is the tavern, aka public house, aka the ordinary, etc. And I think that one could make an argument that the tavern was just as, if not more important than churches. I mentioned earlier work overlaying my mother lodge's meeting locations onto an early map of New Haven, Connecticut, which happens to be one of the first planned gridded cities in the country. This map was published in 1748, and it shows the residents of every house and building that was in the city, and then all of the store type places. And I sat here and tallied it up. And in this town map of New Haven in 1748, taverns outnumbered churches 2-1.
Wow.
So they were certainly important. And obviously taverns had alcohol, and we'll get to that, but I want to talk about other aspects of what they do. So one important role was food. There weren't just restaurants that you could go to. They were always affiliated with the tavern. Additionally, you could meet there. You could meet a friend, you could meet a small group of people, and these meetings had all sorts of purposes. You might conduct business at a tavern, right? There are some private tables near the back. Could also be some political government meetings. Whether or not those were held at the local church or the tavern kind of depended on the purpose and the feeling of the community. Also, a huge portion of tavern culture related to clubs and fraternities. One example is the Tuesday Club. Other clubs during this era were very exclusive, typically all the same class of people in a community. Some clubs, frankly, just met to drink, but then there were other ones that focused on, discussion of philosophy or comedy or other special interest clubs and fraternities. There's also a group that met in a tavern. You may recognize this, to the True Born Sons of Liberty. This was a meeting at the Green Dragon Tavern right before the Boston Tea Party. So even that happened in a tavern. Taverns also were a place where you could get lodging. There weren't typically inns as we think about them today. The tavern was kind of a one-stop shop. And in that same vein, you could also purchase goods, whether that is alcohol or food items, or even things you might need for your home. And so if we think about the American tavern, it's also important to consider the, bear with me just a moment. Let's see if that helps. The role of the tavern along the early postal routes. And so if you take a look at this map that's pictured here, there were kind of three Boston post roads that ran from New York up to Boston. They obviously were colonial for a bit, but news and goods and information at this time traveled by horse. And those horses and riders needed to make pit stops. And so the American tavern at this time was the first kind of gas station and rest stop to refuel and get what you need before moving along. So it is much more important than just food and lodging. Taverns were essential for early colonial communication networks. Additionally, it was a place to gather and be in community with other people in the town. And so this will take us to our next topic, which is alcohol at that time period. But first, a recap. So I have here just kind of a list of all the things that the American tavern did for a community: a restaurant, a hotel, a post office, kind of the local news source, entertainment, court houses, and trials were often held at the tavern. It was a general store. It was really the common meeting house and chamber of commerce for the area. You could gamble there, and then of course it was a bar.
Can you
So
imagine
let's
having
talk
court
about
and
painting.
gambling in the same building today?
I love this painting because you can see someone sipping a big draft of punch in the background. So at that time period, we drank a lot. So it says here, this is from the Alcoholic Republic, one of the sources we used, that Americans in between 1790 and 1830, which was like prime punch period, drank more alcoholic beverages per capita than before or since. Here's another etching showing the importance of punch and men gathered around. Just a couple of graphs to back that up. You can see some sketchy data in early colonial America. But then when we have a little harder data, you see a real peak prior to kind of the Prohibition movement. So in 1770 there, it was around a little shy of 4 gallons per capita. And then it really peaked around 1820, and it has never reached near that height again.
Wow.
And so there's a question that's appropriate to ask: why for all of this alcoholic consumption? And so there are a number of reasons. One is that water was often not tasty, sometimes dangerous to drink. It might smell foul or taste a little foul. Alcohol at the time was considered a cure-all. When in toasts, we toast to someone's health. That's because it was thought that imbibing alcohol was healthy, that it would help revive you. It also, around this time period, was considered part of the diet. And then lastly, culture and tradition around drinking as part of society kind of came with us across the island. When we look at what the early Americans drank, there was, as noted earlier in our conversation, a lot of distilled spirits. Rum, especially rum. And then second place rum seemed to be gin most frequently, as well as brandy and whiskey. Then they also drank some lighter beverages, the most common of which were cider, beer, and wine. So that is a little bit of background in terms of drinking culture in early America broadly. I want to talk now about Freemasons as it relates to it. So the early American Freemasons met in and were very familiar with taverns. This carried over from England. It was prohibitively expensive to have private rooms for only one Masonic lodge or two Masonic lodges in town, and it was much easier to meet in a private room in a tavern and then have refreshment provided for there. And this is evident in my study of our lodges meeting locations, but also, there are a number of very famous early American lodges that met in taverns, including the Ton Tavern in Philadelphia. This in 1732, this was the location of St. John's Lodge number 1. And then, later involved with the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia. And that the current temple in Philadelphia recognizes this as kind of like the birthplace of Masonry in America. But there's always this kind of like rivalry between Philadelphia and Boston. And so it wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about the Bunch of Grapes Tavern.
Indeed.
The constitution of the first lodge, like formally constituted in the states or in the colonies, was called the First Lodge, and then later St. John in 1733. It was called the Bunch of Grapes Tavern. Like most taverns at that time period, there would be signs with animals or vegetation, and pictured here is a recreation of those Bunch of Grapes that is currently in the temple in downtown Boston. So, it's important to consider early Masons in the New World as a part of the culture of the day, right? We have to think about them in context. And at that time period, at every gathering, there was alcohol, whether that was like a city council meeting or whether it was everyone in the community gathering, meeting and like helping hay, whatever it was, there was always going to be alcohol provided. And taverns were an essential part of that early Masonic Lodge experience, just based on their role in the community and that larger context. It wasn't because they had alcohol; it was that they had, private rooms to rent. And because it was that time, alcohol played a really significant role in early Masonic experience. And from writings of early notes in my lodge's history, as well as early studies of lodges in colonial America, punch was a big deal. So I want to have a brief aside about this slide from earlier, this punch bowl. This punch bowl, so this picture wasn't even like in my lodge's records. It
Really?
was in a book in the archives. The book was called Masonic Curios, and then had like a 20-word subtitle. But this book was published in 1903, and I hadn't seen mention of this punch bowl since then. So part of my interest and search was to try to locate this thing. the punch bowl was said to be located in the New Haven Colony Historical Society collection, owned by Hiram Lodge Number 1, but given to the Historical Society to display. And this picture, the note in the picture and in the book that it came from, said China Bowl. The bowl was imported from China by Major William Munson prior to 1799 and was donated to Hiram Lodge by his daughter, Miss Grace Wheeler, on her 99th birthday in 1891 as a token to the memory of her father. The brother who ordered this China bowl was imported and manufactured in China and then imported overseas, ordered a pair of them. He was a soldier in the Revolution. He was a close friend of General Washington prior to the presidency, obviously. He was a worshipful master of our lodge, and he ordered a pair of these Masonic punch bowls with the intent of bringing one to Hiram Lodge and giving one to Brother Washington.
Wow.
The family lore is that the bowl arrived after George Washington had passed, but that he did get the bowl to Martha, still as like a token of his friendship with President Washington. So some of that information was contained in the caption of this picture. It's impossible to see because this picture is 120 years old. Even when I zoomed in, I thought that I saw it. I wanted to believe that was it. And I really, I wanted more than anything to try to find it. So that took me to the Historical Society. I reached out to the manager of collections. She had said essentially like, let me look, it might take a while. And after a wait of some time on pins and needles, Mary Christ indicated that she had found it in their collections, kind of buried. And we were able to go there and take a look at it. So
Wow.
I found laid over here a picture with the original punch bowl, and it was even more vibrant in person. I took pictures of all the outside, a number of interesting Masonic symbols. It's clear that some of those Masonic symbols have changed from the 1790s to today. Some have not. And just a very beautifully produced thing that brothers of my lodge drank punch from hundreds of years ago.
That's gorgeous.
Zoom through a couple pictures here. Then, come to find out, in the late 80s, someone broke into the museum, had nothing to do with the punch bowl, but this person really wanted to get these Revolutionary War pistols. They were owned by Lieutenant Colonel David Humphreys, who was an aide-de-camp to General Washington, and by chance, a brother of another lodge in Connecticut.
Oh, whoa.
When he was breaking into the museum as part of the smash and grab, knocked over the punch bowl and shattered it. I included here in the slide deck just kind of a statement of the team that repaired it and restored it. At the time, the punch bowl was valued and insured at a little over $10,000, and so they used this money to help fund the repairs of it. It's a little hard to see, but there were some large pieces and then some very small pieces, so I tinted it a bit darker there.
They did an amazing job on that, though.
They reassembled it with great care, and it ended up back in the museum's collection. It kind of was in and out of circulation over the years. In and out of circulation over the years. and we.
So that's really cool. Are you able to hear me now?
Went to visit it, and now
I'm
it's
still
like
having audio.
well known as part of the experience of Hiram Lodge.
Sorry, everybody, dealing with a little bit of audio issues here.
I can hear you now, Alex.
Hear me now? Okay. No, you're good. It's the joy of dealing with technology.
It's, as someone who taught during the pandemic, you think I would have worked out all the kinks by now, but no dice.
No, so I was saying there that's just an amazing job, because before you said that, I would not have seen those lines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is stellar, that they were able to, I mean, keep the artwork intact so much. But I mean, obviously, yeah, when you show that picture with that understanding, you can see the lines, but
right.
that is
and
some
I had
very
to mess
skilled
with
work.
the tinting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Very skilled work.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I was really moved to see it in person. It was something that had been made in China in the 1790s, shipped overseas, had such like that item itself carried so much history. I was fascinated by it, and that just really drove me to do the next part of this, which is trying to recreate the punch.
Oh, so, man,
it was really interesting to kind of like go through our records and tally. So I just want to briefly shout out this book, Punch. This person happens to be like a historian of alcohol. It's very kind of witty and entertaining to read. You can see my copy is flagged in a bajillion places. I've used it so much that like the binding is a little bit broken. It's something that I go back to and look at punch recipes even today. So if it is something that at all intrigues you, I would wholeheartedly recommend this book.
Does anyone look at you like you have alcohol issues when they see a history of alcohol book that's that earmarked?
I think it's indicative that I have some issues. Maybe some involving alcohol. I'm not sure what else.
That's fantastic, man. So you're able to dig into your lodge's history and find throughout these various receipts this punch recipe, or at least the ingredients for it. When and like what was going through your mind at that point when you're like, I got to do this?
Well, it was. I've always been kind of like an amateur mixologist and interested in kind of flavors and textures as part of drinks. And when I had done that initial research, and it was just like, I think it's on the slide here, like here, 2 quarts of sherry, a quart of gin, a bunch of spirits, and then these happen to be in pints, but then there would be some that would be like 4 gallons of blank, 4 gallons of rum. Wow. And I just found myself wondering when I was looking at the receipts originally, like, what could they be doing? I know that, like, I get it. They weren't teetotal, like they weren't just not drinking, but I'm pretty sure they weren't like sitting at the bar ripping shots. And so when I saw the punch bowl, I started to put it together, but I feel like my conception of punch at that point was much more like, it was that thing that was on the table at the middle school dance, right? That you like, that was that fake pink color that might have had like 7-Up or something. I didn't really have a conception of punch as like an alcoholic drink.
Right. Punch is that thing that's, it gets spiked, but it's usually not supposed to be alcoholic. You know?
Exactly. And so I started to do a little bit of research and see some recipes, and then managed to come across this book, and it really changed my perspective about what punch is and how it works. And as part of the history in this book, the author David Wondrich kind of distills down, as it were, the general rule of thumb for punches. And he also includes a wide variety of punch recipes. But the general rule that he uses across his recipes and this is a quote, 1 of sour, 1 of sweet, 4 of strong, and 6 of weak. And so this is kind of the ratios of ingredients as you're making any of these punches. And so when we look at sour, the most common thing is lemons. And if lemons were out of season or hard to get, limes were a good backup. And at that time period, sometimes those words were used interchangeably. And so down at the bottom of this receipt that's up on the screen is a dozen limes, or not limes, excuse me, lemons. And so some of the other receipts have limes, but mostly lemons.
And
So
I love how
sour
they
is
put it
certainly-
into, I love how they put it into rhyme form there. Like they don't want to forget this recipe, right?
I mean, it stuck with me over the years. Like I prepped this research in 2016 and 2017, and I still, it's like a mantra almost.
That's awesome.
So certainly sours were accounted for in our receipts over and over again. Sweet is obviously sugar. Sugar at that time period was not as you buy sugar today, right? Not loosely packed or granulated. It was often done in kind of a loaf. And so it was coarse, kind of like sandpaper, and you would flake off sugar as you needed it. Here you can see that it's a pound of sugar, right? The early secretaries, obviously, right, because we were still under colonial rule, you see the pound sign either as what we would call hashtag today, or us elder millennials would know as the pound sign from the phone keyboard. But they also sometimes would use the pound of like the British currency type symbol. And so sugar, here we can see a pound of it. So plenty of sugars. And then if we think about strong versus weak, the strong stuff, as indicated here, was typically rum or brandy, or a mixture of both. So that's the strong stuff. And then 6 of weak. The weak part was not as clearly elucidated. Before we get to the weak, so we talked about rum, brandy. It was also sometimes sherry. So here you can see sherry wine. It was also sometimes like variants on sherry, like Madeira or Tenerife. So all of those are examples of like a strong, fortified spirit that we would throw in the punch. So again, here's like receipt after receipt evidence that there was always booze. But what doesn't survive in the receipts is the weak element. Weak would, according to the book that I've been praising, would be water sometimes, or black tea or green tea.
Okay.
And so we had no indication of what the weak ingredient was for our attempt to recreate the punch. You know, like obviously we could get rum or brandy or sherry, but we had no indication of what the kind of preferred weak ingredient was.
Sure.
And so that led to the need to do some experimentation. So regardless of what the weak thing was, it was like almost universally flavored with citrus. And so there's kind of a 3-part process to make the weak part of the punch. The first thing is something called an oleosaccharum. Essentially, you peel just the zest off of lemons. You can't do it with limes because the final product is really kind of bitter and unpalatable. So you zest the lemon, and then you would kind of rub it along that loaf of sugar And to recreate that, we like kind of muddled sugar and lemon zest peels together. You let it sit for like an hour, and that helps draw out the essential oils in the citrus. And so it pulls out the essential oils and makes kind of a very lemony syrup. And so after that, you then kind of take that oleosaccharum and add it to either hot water or green tea or black tea. You stir it around, you let that steep all together for 5 to 10 minutes, and then you take out all the solids. You filter out all of the remaining lemon peels and any of the other little bits in it. And this hot water helps maximize the extraction of the flavor and essential oils from the citrus. So then finally you add a little more freshly squeezed juice. So all those lemons that you peeled to get the zest of, you squeeze the juice out and add it to this water or tea plus oleosaccharum thing. And this thing together is called a shrub. I've noticed in the last 5 years or so, I've started to see shrubs sold at farmers markets and at stores. And I'm not sure if I had just never noticed it before this research paper, but shrubs seem to have a presence in modern day, whether or not they're intended for punch. They're intended to be consumed because they have a lot of really rich flavor. And so that is the weak. The weak is the shrub. And then you combine it with the spirits. You chill it, but not like ice cold,
Sure.
because when things are too cold, it limits the aromatics over the head of the drink. And so, a little bit below room temperature is ideal. And so, armed with this punch book and the ratios, we sat out to try to recreate something that we thought tasted good and was feasible for something that they could have had to drink from the 1760s to the 1830s. Since we had record in the receipts of all of these different spirits, and we didn't know the shrubs, it led to a huge number of combinations that we wanted to try. So I made shrubs with lime, with lemon, and then with lemon and green tea, and then lemon and black tea, and then a whole bunch of different combinations of spirits listed below there. And I used ratios from some of the recipes in the book for, like, if I did rum and sherry, I used those combinations. Here's a picture of that oleosaccharum. You can see I used some like sugar in the raw here, so it was extra gritty to pull out some of the essential oils. We don't need to read through all this. It was just like notes on how I prepared each thing. The shrub, after it steeps, really gets more and more of that flavor. And not this kind of shrub, right? We're talking about the liquid kind. And so I set this up essentially in a grid. I made all of my combinations of spirits and then set up a tasting grid. And we had 3 people taste test each and every one of these and give it a score out of 10. And then we kind of like combined our scores. So we wanted to narrow it down from, I think, 28 possibilities to like 3 or 4. And so a couple of us, we had different palates, and we wanted to suss out which of these were terrible and which of these were good to the modern taste. A couple more action shots here. You can see they all, it was like a huge gradient of different colors. This was the final score. The gist overall here is that the lime shrub was not so great, and neither was the green tea shrub. Overall, the lemon shrub seemed to perform the best, and best when served with either brandy and sherry or rum and brandy. And so that is kind of what we went armed with. We took these 3 punch recipes to the lodge when we presented this paper, and in refreshment after the lodge, everybody taste tested. and we then kind of like took an informal vote or poll on which one the brothers present liked the most, and that's how we arrived at our consensus recipe. Of note, an interest or an area for further research for me is gin punches. There was gin in our receipts occasionally, although not nearly as frequently as the sherry or rum and so on, or brandy. I'm still interested in trying gin punches, but this is what we're most proud of.
Did you happen to
is,
notice in the time if it was maybe a price thing or why that
it
would
may
be?
have been. And we were not drinking the expensive stuff.
Right.
If you're
Right.
throwing 3 gallons of stuff into a bowl, you're not going to use top shelf. Maybe not bottom shelf, but maybe the one right above the bottom.
There you go.
And in our recreation, that's kind of what we found. So I have up here posted the kind of consensus punch recipe to create a gallon of this punch. This was the one that the brothers voted on, and an important element of every one of these punch recipes was being topped with freshly ground nutmeg. And I at first thought this was a little cheesy. Connecticut is known as the nutmeg state. But I have to admit, it really does add to the flavor of the punch.
Well, there you go.
And that is kind of the end of the conversation that I had prepped for, but I would love to answer any questions you have.
Man, that's fantastic. And I guess the first question I would say there's, so you take this recipe and you've obviously got all these various variations of this drink. You came to a consensus, but how many were strayed? Were there guys that preferred one over the other?
This consensus recipe of kind of the straight lemon shrub and then rum and brandy was, I think it won, had about like 65 to 70% of the vote. So when we consider there were 3 options, there was one, now I can't recall which one it was, but there was one that had like a vote. But overall, brothers seem to really prefer this one.
That's awesome. So I'm really intrigued because when I did the history book for my lodge back in, we released it in 2018. Been working on it probably 3 years prior to that. My wife was the one that helped me dig through all the minutes, and we did find a bunch of times because it was very popular in those days that the ladies who I guess they were probably all OES at the time, but the ladies of the lodge ran the banquet hall. That was just kind of their deal, and it was just kind of a thing that they always open lodge and then retired into the banquet hall and then would go back to lodge and close later. So like the bulk of their activities were in there, and it was a formal room, and they always had a meal. And we found lots of receipts for, regular celebrations with listed way more people than we fit in there today. So I'm like, man, you guys really like to party. But obviously the big thing was always cigars in the time, but I really want to go back now and look at those individual items and see what there is to put together, because I think what you've done here is really special. Kind of piercing past that veil of the brethren before us and understanding that aspect of history on this deeper level, and then being able to recreate that and experience that history, I think is really, really beautiful. So how often have you guys used this recipe since? And what do you do with it now?
We use it at a few of our like annual communications or installation banquets for our obviously in the before times pre-COVID during Grand Lodge sessions. There would be like hospitality rooms in the evenings. And we made it for a few of those. Nowadays, I continue my interest in punch. I am always like interested in trying new recipes or variations on this recipe. I think the last time I made punch was February. I usually make about a gallon and then can it. I just opened a jar
Okay.
tonight. So you can see it's about this color when it comes out. And that way I kind of get to enjoy it little by little over the next few months.
That's awesome. So cool. So history-wise, in your particular area, have you had the opportunity or sparked the interest of maybe surrounding lodges to see if they've had anything comparable within their lodge's history?
I personally have not. I've helped some of the bodies that I was a part of manage and better store archived material. Um, that's one thing that I'm very passionate about is, I feel lucky to have been able to hold in my hands, record books from the 1750s,
Definitely.
receipts from that time period. And I only have that good fortune because Brothers Before Me took great care to preserve that material. And that is something that I am interested in connecting with brothers or lodges with to try to help preserve that history, as well as, frankly, like catalog it and figure out what's in there. So
Yeah,
many of these
definitely.
receipts I found in like an old manila folder, like those
Right.
expandy folders, just tucked up and away. And I'm sure that no one had opened that in years, if not
So
decades.
So you and I share that interest hand in hand about the archival aspect, and really for the same reasons as well. I mean, my history passion and our archival and digitization passion all started from digging into my lodge's history and just seeing that overwhelming need there. So I got to ask, because we were chartered 1868. You guys are far beyond that. What majors have you guys taken in the preservation of your lodge's history?
Yeah, when I was on this kick, we kind of like reconstituted our lodge's archives committee. Um,
Awesome.
the the building that we currently inhabit, we share with a number of other lodges, as well as you know uh, the local Scottish Rite Valley and uh, all the York Rite bodies in town share this building. It has three pretty large rooms, and when it was built, it was even more populated. And all of the organizations have like an old bank safe. Each organization has an old bank
Right.
safe. And so one of the first things I did was get a data logger to monitor temperature change and humidity change in there
Ooh,
to make sure that it was a safe place to store those things long term.
sure.
So I put one in that room, and then there's a different kind of storage room that people are more in and out of. But I wanted to kind of compare those and think about what was best. The safe ended up being a good bet. Like cataloged things and got the special archival wrapping paper and boxes to store things and
Right. Acid free.
store them flat and just try to preserve like super thoughtfully those old things. We
Definitely.
had some of our early records destroyed in a fire. So our lodge was, uh, as was common at the time in the 1750s, there were fellowcraft lodges and masters lodges. The brothers
Right.
in the masters lodge were always affiliated with fellowcraft lodge, but they kept separate minute books up until the mm, like I think 1799, if I remember correctly. And they would often meet in the same types of places, but always separately. So not everyone was a member of the Masters Lodge. And we lost some of our early Fellowcraft Lodge records in a fire in like the 1830s. And so since then, we've taken great care to preserve those things.
That's awesome. Well, I've got a couple more questions on that, but we are at 8:59. So as we near the 9 o'clock hour here, I wanted to ask if you would do us the honor in offering up a toast this evening.
Absolutely. And pardon me while I just grind a little nutmeg into this. Um,
I'd be
into this pot.
disappointed if you didn't.
So as I thought about a toast for this evening, I think about how this This podcast and this show is really a brotherhood and community well dispersed, people across the country and internationally. I was thinking more about what I said earlier regarding alcohol and its early uses. And so I just want to say to all brothers, wheresoever dispersed, here's to your health.
To your health. Cheers. Fantastic. Thank you so much, brother.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't mind, before we wrap up for this evening, talking about you guys obviously lost some in the fire, which masonry seems to have, obviously this history of fire and water damage and so much loss there. With the acid-free boxes and taking those measures and even the temperature control, which is way more than I've heard pretty much any other lodge out there doing. So kudos to you guys. Have you gotten into any digitization efforts?
Yeah, so yes and no. One of our brothers has over the years transcribed these record books.
Sure.
In my travels of all the minutes, I learned to tell one secretary from another by their handwriting, which was an interesting result of spending that much time looking at the minutes books. And frankly, a lot of that early script is hard to read. He started that project at a time where scanners were not a very common occurrence.
Sure.
Still on our mind, or on my mind, is that potential to digitize for archival purposes as like photographs or scans.
Right.
But it's not a project that we've begun.
Definitely. It's a huge undertaking. And like you were saying, when I was in the process of doing our book, we had ordered because you've got your variations of book scanners. You've also got your variations of like archival level professional that you just, is way out of a lodge's reach and something that isn't a lodge's reach. And we paid back in 2017, probably close to $300 for one off of Amazon, which I felt pretty good about. And it took great pictures. We bought it because of its OCR capabilities, making the content searchable by text.
Sure.
And that did not work at all, which was a huge disappointment. You'd open it and just sit there and spin. And, we sent tech support email and, weeks later got a broken English back. Yeah, it not work so well. But you said it did. But recently we've hooked up with this Caesar brand, and they are phenomenal. So if you guys get back into that effort, by all means, I would suggest to go with them, because the equipment is great. It's affordable, and the OCR has been really good. I've been surprised even on the cursive writing that it's hard for even us to read. It picks up some of it, surprisingly. And I think that's only going to get better over time. So
yeah, I bet.
But
so cool.
I want to thank you so much. You dropped a bomb of knowledge on us this evening. I'm really intrigued to try that recipe now. Like I've got to taste this for myself. So I can see myself at the store tomorrow buying some ingredients. But before we wrap up this evening, what final thoughts do you have, and any plugs?
Yeah, I just want to again express my gratitude for being able to be with you tonight and chat about history and topics that I'm super interested in. I hope that you and other brothers might be intrigued enough to try this punch or other punches. It is very drinkable and pretty light. It's a nice, refreshing drink. I don't have any plugs personally. I don't have. I'm not like well known enough in Masonic circles to have a website or anything. My plug, I think, is just for brothers to do what I've done. You find something that piques your interest and just pull on that thread little by little until you get a clear picture of what's out there. And I think that is, the idea of research sounds intimidating or scary, but just, shine a light on it and see where that path goes.
Well said, my brother. Again, want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on today, taking out some of your time to share this history with us. It's been an amazing ride. I enjoyed everything I learned tonight. And I will throw out one plug there for you, because I do believe that you're listed on the Masonic Construction Speakers Bureau that Brother Robert Johnson put together. So if you guys enjoyed what Brother Cedric shared with us this evening and want to hear him speak, you can find him there at MasonicConstruction.com. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining in live on all the different platforms we're on. We hope to see you soon. And until then, take care, brothers.
Thanks, everyone.